Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is Ronsley. Good to see you. This is a live recording of Should I Start a Podcast? If you're looking for the edited version, you can find it on all the podcast channels. It's called Should I Start a Podcast? And if you're a business owner that has a story on how a podcast has helped or hindered your business, I would love to hear from you. So DM me. Let me know what you've been doing with your podcast, how it's been working or not working or getting in the way. Because I hear a lot of stories about how a podcast is not a good idea because there's too many moving parts, which is totally true. But maybe you're not using it correctly. So I'd love to hear the stories on how you use it. Today, I'm going to cover mistake number 59, which is recording your podcast exclusively for your clients only or your current clients. And I'm going to talk about why that is not necessarily the best idea. And if you agree, disagree with anything that I say or we say in this show, please use the comments to let me know. If there's a better way to do anything as well, I'm keen to learn that. And if you did not know, it's really weird because I've been doing these lives for the last couple of weeks and I've forgotten to mention this. We Are Podcast 2022 is happening this year in Brisbane after the 2020 debacle of COVID, and we didn't have it for 2 years. So November 10th and 11th in Brisbane, over 200 odd podcasters coming together, business owners. And if you're anywhere around the area, you should look at coming, because it is something that I started in 2015. It was the first podcasting conference in Australia back then, actually in the Southern Hemisphere back then. And we are on our 9th iteration of doing We Are Podcast. So We Are Podcast 2022, all focused on growth. If you're a podcaster business owner that wants more revenue, more new listeners, and more credibility from your show, that's where you should go. So go to wearepodcast.com and find out more information. Today, I have Charles Gaudet in the house, who is the author of Predictable Profits Playbook. Now, not often do you find people, everyone wants to be the 7-figure business owner, but not often do you see people making that leap from going from startup to 7 figures, because it feels like a big jump. And primarily, I feel like the biggest jump is learning to go from solo to a team and getting team to the operations and then getting culture on. So I'm keen to hear the story on how Charles started his podcast and how he's growing his business using his podcast. So here is Charles. Charles, welcome to the show. Good to have you, buddy. What's going on?
My man, I've been looking forward to this podcast for a long time. Yeah. So I'm real happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Just for context, where on the planet are you and what time is it?
I'm in Jupiter, Florida, and it's 5:10 p.m. Eastern time.
So you're in the past, which is fine. I'm not saying anything. There's nothing wrong with the past. You just moved to Florida, haven't you? So what's that move been like? And just give us context around your business. How long have you had it? And what is the current focus?
Wow, there's a lot there. So I'm going to try to kind of answer all those questions at once. So through a number of different personal events, I realized in my life that I'm not going to live with any more shoulds anymore. That if I catch myself saying I should do something, that I'm just going to go ahead and do it. So there's a big difference between saying you should do something and you actually do it. And so I caught myself talking with my wife saying, we should move to Florida. And then as soon as it came out of my mouth, I realized that we had to do it, at least give it a shot for a year, so that at the end of my lifespan, when I look back at my life, I don't have anything on my should list that I should have done something. Now, then to answer the question in terms of my business and how I got it to where it is today.
Yeah.
So I've been an entrepreneur since the age of 4. I never had a traditional, quote unquote, real job. After graduating from college, I started a business nominated by Ernst & Young as being one of the nation's best seed stage companies. And at 24, I created my first multi-million-dollar business. From that point, I continued to build and grow a number of different companies until 2010. That's when I started Predictable Profits, because somebody offered to pay me to help them grow their business. And And I kind of drew the conclusion that son of a bee, maybe I can make a living growing other people's companies. And so from that time, we've taken many companies over the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list. Recently helped a company go from $1 million to well over $40 million within, I believe it was about a 6-year period. And we work with companies. We specialize in 7 and 8 figure companies. So we work with companies as high as 500 plus $1 million a year. And usually these companies are coming to us for one of three reasons. They're saying, what needs to happen for our company to grow faster? Or some months are feast, some months are famine. How do we bring more predictability into our revenue? Or the third one is just the company's far too dependent on me. How do we scale? And just with the work that we did in 2020, the International Business Times reached out. They call me the go-to business coach for 7 and 8 figure companies, which is kind of neat. And then Disrupt put out a list of the top 22 business coaches, and I was fortunate enough to be on the top of the list. Though I will say, LA Tribune just came up with one, and they marked me as number 4, and I'm still a little upset by that because I was beat out by Tony Robbins and Grant Cardone, which hey, at least if they're smart people, and I guess I can't be too upset. But so that's my life.
So such an amazing story, and I want to ask you this question because it's on my list. What was the first creation that you ever sold and made money on?
So at 4 years old, I created artwork and sold it to my neighbors. There, for context, when I tell people that story, oftentimes people will come back and say, so you were born an entrepreneur. But that's actually not the case. See, people make decisions either out of inspiration or desperation. And for me, it was a little bit more on that desperation side. My dad was an entrepreneur as well. He worked every waking hour of every day. So he would get up before I woke up, and he would go to bed after I went to sleep, and he worked 7 days a week. And so the odd times that I did see my dad, he would tell me, kid, if you ever want to make something out of your life, you got to be an entrepreneur. So here I am, 4 years old, wanting to get my dad's attention. And so I wanted to start a business to show him I could be an entrepreneur. And so I just started creating artwork. Then I would go to my neighbors and I would, charge them anywhere from 25 to 50 cents for a piece of artwork. And it's so hard to say no to a kid. So,
Yeah.
Made a few bucks and I was happy.
So what was that learning curve like? Like, what did you learn from going and showing your art to people? Because that's probably what artists in general hate, is like, what if someone criticizes my art? Like, how does that go down? And maybe for a kid, it's not all that much, but do you remember what that was like? Do you remember was it like outside your comfort zone, or was it just like, I'm just doing this, and now in retrospect, they can look back and it looks like a great story?
Excellent question. I do remember being very nervous going to sell my first piece of art, but then it got easier and easier, and I got more and more confident until I got to Mrs. Hersey's house. And I go to Mrs. Hersey's house and I say, hey, look, I'm selling this artwork. And she said, for how much? And it's either 25 cents or 50 cents or whatnot. And she said, Charlie, is this your best work? And it was the first time I had an objection. Everybody else is like, it's only 50 cents. Here's 2 quarters, Go have fun. But it's the first time I ever got an objection. And I was really, really, really embarrassed. And I knew to my core that it wasn't my best work, but I was only doing it for the money.
Yeah.
And I never drew the connection that you get paid in direct proportion to the value that you provide others. So I admitted to her, I go, no, this isn't my best work. She said, why would you sell me something that's not your best work? And now, the blood is rushing into my face and I can feel my heart pulsing in my face as I'm super embarrassed. And I'm like, I don't know. And she says, Charlie, at most, this is worth maybe 2 or 3 cents. So I will buy this from you, but I'm only going to give you maybe 2 or 3 cents. Are you okay with that? And I'm like, yeah, here you go. You could take it for 3 cents. And that lesson was one of the hardest lessons to accept as a kid. Yet in hindsight, I never produced scribbles again. And from that point on, I never wanted to experience somebody questioning whether or not that was my best work. So I always ensured that before it went to market, that it was my best work. And again, the best lesson I have got, one of the best lessons I got in business, you get paid in direct proportion to the value you provide others.
Yeah, that's a huge lesson to learn, especially over time. How do you balance the line between prolific and perfect if you're kind of always thinking about whether this is your best work? At what point do you decide that this is okay to ship?
Wow, you're hitting me with a lot of these really, really great questions. Um, you're always going to find ways to make things better, um, but we do believe that done is better than perfect. And so, if you're done, but you understand the impact and the value that you can provide others, traditionally that's at that point we say, done is better than perfect. I like to make sure that when we're providing something, especially if it's a new product or a new service, that it comes with it a very, very strong guarantee, so that anybody who would do business with us can walk away knowing that one way or another that they're going to walk out, um, that they're going to work out ahead. And so I do believe that, when you're producing a product, and if you don't have the testimonials, if you don't have the social proof, if you're not clear on the value that you're providing other people,
Yeah.
start off with a very, very strong guarantee, and not a guarantee that says, hey, try this. And, if you don't like it, you have 30 days to give, where I'll give you your money back. I'm talking about a bold, hairy, audacious type of guarantee. A guarantee that says, look, give this a shot, try it out for a whole year. If for whatever reason you're not smiling year to year, just let me know and I'll give you all your money back. Like, take a year, spend as much time as need with it, put it to the test, see what kind of results that you get. You know, Something along those lines. When you assume more risk than your client assumes, that's the ideal type of guarantee.
It's crazy because I actually wrote down the word risk, and you sort of covered that because you almost are removing risk from your client's plate. You're kind
Yeah.
of like making their lives easier by making the decision easier for them to make. How does a podcast fit into that? Like, what was the idea when you first? What happened when you first had the idea to start the podcast, and how did you think it was going to fit into the business structure?
So the podcast for me is not necessarily specifically designed to generate leads and take those leads and convert them into business. The podcast for me was another method to stay in front of people and to indoctrinate them into some of the ways that we feel and or think, and ways we're growing and scaling businesses and whatnot, because we have found through our experience that consumption drives conversion. The more content that your prospect consumes of yours, the higher the probability that they are of ultimately becoming a consumer. Now, we've all seen this marketing funnel that the marketers have put out there: the top of the funnel, middle funnel, and bottom of the funnel. And people tend to think that that funnel concept means that our buyers, our prospects, go through a linear process starting in the top of the funnel and go down. What most people will later be shocked to find out is that that whole funnel concept was actually created in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Ronze, I think you'd agree that buying has changed a lot in the last 100 or so years. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so Google put out this report, I believe it was in 2020, when they really kind of broke down to say, well, how do people buy? And what they found is that there's a triggering event. And from that triggering event, they go through this cycle of exploration and evaluation, and exploration and evaluation. And it was Forrester research that said people will be looking at about 27 different sources of information before finally making a buying decision. And so if we follow the original type of marketing funnel, you get people in the funnel and you just try to force the buying process real quick. But
Yeah.
if you look at the current marketing funnel, it's about supporting the person's journey. and making sure that it's an understanding that they're going to buy on their time, not on your time.
Huge.
So the best way that you can support that journey is to be everywhere. The laws of effective frequency dictate that it takes 20 brand impressions for somebody to go from, I don't know who you are, to now all of a sudden I want to do business with you. It's part of, creating that demand. So if you want to support that exploration and evaluation, if you want to create demand, you got to be where your prospects are. And that podcast has been an incredible conversion tool for us, because people who may have come to our website, maybe they took an assessment or they subscribed to our daily coaching emails, they're also listening to the podcast, and they get these aha moments. To eventually these aha moments continue to build up and build up, and they go, oh, you know what? I need to work with Predictable Profits because that would change everything for me. And then they get on the phone, and the conversion rate is extremely high at this point because they've already consumed enough information. Because again, consumption is what drives conversion.
Yeah, I mean, the reason consumption drives conversion is because the consumption builds trust, and because they're listening to your voice, and it's like parents sing to their kids before they're born for a reason. So, I love what you're putting down and picking everything up. Let's talk about. You mentioned earlier that you were not doing it for leads, but your podcast is almost like a nurturing tool. Is that fair to say?
The podcast is the nurturing tool, and that's where we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck. When we look at the podcast as a nurturing tool, it doesn't mean that the podcast doesn't bring us leads. It's funny because I do remember I was walking down the street with my kids, and all of a sudden this guy jumps up and he plasters his face against a store window, and he goes, hey you. And I'm looking at him, I go, what's going on? He goes, I listen to your podcast. And I'm like, and the kids are like, Dad, did you hear that? He listens to your podcast. And, of course, my kids, believe it or not, people actually do listen to it, right? So, I mean, it's great from a positioning standpoint. It's great because it does bring in leads, but the highest value is in nurturing. It's in Stanford, is in consumption.
Yeah. And I just want to tack on to that, because one listen on your podcast cannot be compared to someone clicking on a Facebook ad or watching a reel or watching a quick video or reading a blog post, because every other form of content, you got to stop what you're doing to consume it, as opposed to a podcast where you can do other things while you're consuming it. So someone being plugged, or you being plugged into someone's ears for like half an hour, is worth way more than someone reading a couple of emails from you or someone.
Absolutely.
So that's why the nurture is so powerful with audio. And I love the way you're using it. And here's the thing. I believe that people kind of think that a podcast is a marketing tool or a content tool. But I believe that a podcast is the best business development tool that exists. And I'm curious whether the podcast has brought business in a way that you never expected it to do. Has that happened in your business yet?
Well, Ronsley, do you see what my shirt says here?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Results.
Yeah.
Right? The shirt says results. And I believe there are reasons and results. The only thing that matters is the results. We've done well over 100 episodes at this point. We record podcasts every single week, and we've done so at this point now for years. I wouldn't be doing it if it didn't make such a huge impact to our bottom line. It's funny. I don't listen to podcasts, right? Which is weird, because I just assumed, and I resisted it for a long time, where I'm like, I'm not going to record a podcast because, I myself don't listen to podcasts. It's just for whatever reason I don't. And so I made this assumption that, well, if I don't listen to it, then podcasts aren't worth a lot. But then as I started bringing people onto my team and we were discussing different marketing strategies, several people said, why don't we have a podcast? And eventually I said, well, you know what? Why don't we just test it and we'll see what happens. And if if it's worth it, we'll continue doing it. But if it's not worth it, then we're going to stop. But we can't fall into this trap into thinking that we are our customers, that just because we may behave a certain way, or we may have preference to a certain way, or we may listen to podcasts or don't listen to podcasts or whatever it might be, that our customers are the exact same as we are. And thank God for the other members of my team that encouraged me and pushed me into creating our own podcast. Because of that, without any hesitation, it is easily added, multiples of seven figures in total to our bottom line because of just being there for people. And again, earlier in our episode, we talked about scribbles.
Yeah.
And when people have difficulty getting their podcast to work with them, it's because they look at it as scribbles. They go, you know what? I need to have a podcast, so I'm not going to put much thought into it. I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to invite some guests. I'm going to throw a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to go for quantity and try to get a whole bunch of episodes. And you know what? If after 20, 30 episodes, I don't get a whole bunch of leads, then I'm just going to throw my hands up and give up. But you might get somebody to listen to one episode, but the only reason why they're going to come back is if they pick something up new and exciting from that podcast. If you record a podcast and your prospect takes a step back and they look up and they go, wow, Ronsley, you know what? That changes everything. You just created that aha moment. And the culmination and the combination of all those aha moments help to establish preference. And if they get one aha moment from listening to your podcast, that makes it so worth it for them that they're going to want to listen to another one, and they're going to want to listen to another one. So the way that I look at it is, in these podcasts, if you can get somebody to sit back and say, wow, that changes everything, you have just won that one podcast episode and earned yourself another listener for another episode. And that's sort of, I think, the difference between those people who have podcasts that do really, really well and podcasts that don't work well. It's really going to come down to the quality of the content, and more specifically, are they delivering something new and something different, a fresh perspective?
Yeah. So I want to get into your ecosystem, because obviously there is something at the back end that makes this whole thing work. But before that, I'd love to talk about your guests. How do you go about picking who the people are that you're going to interview on your show?
Well, I picked you as one of them, right? Well, and I did, because you and I had the wonderful opportunity of meeting in person out in Palmetto Bluff, and it was within the first 30 seconds that you and I had a conversation where I had that step back and I'm going, wow, this guy's brilliant. This guy's, already in our initial conversation, I had one of those aha moments, like, wow, this guy changes everything. Because you're such a smart guy, you bring a whole bunch of different perspectives, and that's what we're looking for in the guests. We just don't want anybody to show up to the show. The question is, if I'm going to bring somebody on the show, are they going to offer a fresh perspective to my audience in a way that my audience wants to hear it?
Yeah.
And so that's big. You do one thing with your podcast that is also very similar to mine, except you do something that I've already learned from you that is one step better than what I do. And you're killing multiple birds with one stone. We're recording this. This is going live, and then you're going to repurpose and publish it in so many different ways. That's one of the pieces that we're missing, is when we record these podcasts, I haven't thought about, hey, why don't we just broadcast this live? Because that is, one extension, one opportunity where we can get people to see these podcasts. But what I do is I do record the podcasts and I create video and audio. And I take the recorded podcast and then I send it out to my crew, and then my crew slices and dices the podcast. And then we're able to use different snippets of the podcast and of the guests and whatnot and then we share them all across social, and in many cases we'll sponsor different ones and run ads, just because, again, we want consumption drives conversion.
Yeah.
And we want to continue to leverage all of our activities in order to maximize the consumption.
Yeah. Yeah. Huge. So the idea of this and doing it live is, well, I've done over 1,500 interviews, and most of them have happened.
Holy cow. And I'm your favorite already.
Of course. And they will always happen in a silo. Like they always happen on Zoom or Squadcast or Riverside or wherever it was, and no one really knew it was happening unless I did a story or something to that effect, or said, hey, I'm interviewing this person. What questions would you like to ask them? And so on and so forth. But then I was like, wait a minute. If I kind of do this, which is quite simple, and I wonder whether you can tear a page from that book. Who has my target market but has no competitive overlap with me? Who has the people that I have but do very different things to what I do? And because I'm in the podcasting world, there's not many people that do what I do in the way I do it, and with the amount of experience that I've had over the last decade doing it. So it becomes easy to partner. So I go after the people that have my market but do different things than I do. And then I decide that I'm going to interview them live like this, and it goes to all the live channels, and it's like, oh wow, it's already published, really. But then my team will take this interview of an hour, remove half an hour that's not relevant, and make it more consumable for a podcast, and then they make a half an hour edited version from which the reels get made and all the other things get made. So when someone's listening to the podcast, they're listening to like you would never read a blog post that's not edited. You would never read a book that's not edited. So we create podcasts that are rearranged in such a way that someone, when they're listening to it, makes it consumable for them to kind of go, oh, that's what they're trying to get at, because maybe they said something at the end that needed to be put at the start, and so on and so forth. So the reason for doing this is very simple. Is I believe that, like I said earlier, a podcast is the best business development tool that exists. Now, we've had this conversation right now, and it's going to be released in December, right? So it's like I'm ahead of schedule. And what it also means is that December and January, I don't have to do any recordings, right? I can take the time off. And doing it this way allows me to build not only momentum for We Are Podcast, which is the event coming up, and this is my campaign, so this is my work time, my work period, and I'm in campaign mode, and I'm everywhere. And then when it's done, I can take a break and rest and relax, because most entrepreneurs don't know to do that. I'm keen to hear from you as a coach. What are the things you see most often for entrepreneurs that we kind of are doing by mistake, or we are kind of like not paying attention to, that we kind of need to be paying attention to grow our business to the next level?
So, great question. First of all, I just want to take one step back. You talked about how podcasting is one of the greatest tools and whatnot. And again, reasons and results. And if you look at the results that you've achieved on your podcast, and that for what you've achieved for your clients, the results are there. So for anybody who's already sitting there going, well, I don't know, does that make sense? Just look at the results that Ronsley has. And so I want to make sure that, I do give you a plug there, because I, quite frankly, was pretty impressed and amazed at what you've been able to accomplish. I want to give you a high five there.
Thank you.
Now when we look at, when people hear the stories about how many different companies we've scaled, and how we've grown companies, to the tunes of millions and tens of millions and so forth, and many times doing it so quick, they just think that we have some sort of magic formula or a magic strategy or system and all this other fun stuff. And the truth of the matter is what we do is very, very effective, but it's very boring. And you know, we've broken things down into three ways, and it's optimization, systemization, and innovation. We call it the OSI method.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's optimization, systemization, and then innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And when you ask the question, what is it that most companies do wrong? What they do is they're constantly starting something and then trying to start a new thing or trying to start a new thing and whatnot without taking the time to really optimize. So that's one problem. The other problem is that they just rely too much on word of mouth and referrals, and that is a whole other issue and concern. Um, but what optimization does is it allows you to leverage momentum to figure out what's working, what's not working, so you can do more of what's working. It's so much easier to take your business from, say, $1 million to 2 million than it is to go from $0 to $1 million, because you're leveraging momentum. And when you know where to turn the dial, where you know how to add the fuel, you can add a lot more zeros to your business very quickly and more efficiently with optimization. And then you go to systemization. Now, systemization, if you look at entrepreneurs and they're juggling many different things all at the same time. And if you've ever seen a juggler juggling 10 balls in the air and they drop one, what typically happens to all the balls?
Yeah, they fall down.
They all fall.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with entrepreneurs. They're working so hard, they're doing so many things and so forth, that you want to systematize. Now that you have it optimized, you put it into systems, whether that's processes or automations or whatnot. So you know that this is happening and it's happening consistently and being done. And then this way, now that you've freed up your time and your headspace and you know that things are getting done, then you innovate. That's when you bring in a new profit center, add a new spoke to the wheel, whatever that might be, where you can generate more revenue, more profits, and more sales. And then you start that cycle all over again. Now you go back to optimization, then systemization, and then innovation. And then this way you're building that company on top of a very strong, solid base.
It's so important. I mean, because my journey, I mean, I started from scratch, and then, becoming or getting a team member on board was my first sort of big step, right? It's like, oh, it's not just me. I have other people involved, and then getting them to operate on the same level, or in a way that I wanted them to do it, or wanted to get the results, is a next step in getting operations sorted. And then when you have so many people around you, then working on culture was another step for me to kind of like learn. And I've had all these different learnings along the way, and I feel like because I'm a creator, I jumped to innovation before I went to optimization and systemization. Sure. And I see that a lot, especially when someone's a solopreneur and has created this cool thing, and now they have to learn to be a business owner. Then they kind of land up in this innovation circle, and they don't know what to systemize, or they systemize the wrong things. Do you see that happening at all, or is it just like my limited perspective of the world?
No, I mean, one of the most common things that we hear from, seven-figure and multi-seven-figure CEOs is they say, look, I've got so many ideas and I got so many things that I'm working on. I just don't know what to focus on next. And, that's kind of that result of, not leveraging momentum, because momentum tends to guide on what's the most important thing that you can do to help move the business forward in the most efficient way possible. And then the other component of it is you're doing too many things all at once.
Yes.
Right. There's a book, I believe it's called The One Thing. And in that one thing, they have a proverb that says, he who tries to catch two rabbits ends up catching none. Most people undervalue the point of completion.
Yeah.
And so, that tends to, but if you're going to complete something, so we worked with this client back in 2000 and 2012. We worked with this client, helped build out this customer re-engagement strategy. And within 1 month, she had 100% increase in month-to-month sales. So, I mean, if you were to have 100% increase in month-to-month sales at that point, I mean, it's like a massive, massive win.
Yeah.
And so she's happy. We high five, keep in contact, and part ways. A couple years go by. I reach back out and I said, "By the way, how's that campaign still running for you?" And the look on her face, her face turned white. She's like, "Oh my gosh!" And I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Oh, believe it or not, I forgot to run it again." I
Oh,
said,
wow.
what are we talking about?" And she says, "Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, I forgot to run it again." You know what happened is we had so many sales and we had to fulfill the orders and we were still responding to emails. And then from there, something else happened and something else happened and we completely forgot.
Wow.
And that's very typical when an entrepreneur is juggling so many different balls. There's so many different opportunities that are going on within the business. If you don't systematize, once you have something done, things like that are going to slip through your fingers all the time.
Yeah, that is so cool. And this is I'm saying this is so cool coming from someone who's written a thesis on process quality and taken 2 companies to ISO 9001, and I know how powerful systems are. I want to ask about your ecosystem because yes, you have this podcast, and yes, you have this business, and yes, you have people that are getting nurtured. But what happens when they kind of go, yes, I want to work with Predictable Profits? What is the steps involved? So what happens, like, if someone has been listening to the podcast for a while and they go, yep, excuse me, I know that Charles and Predictable Profits can help me. How do they get involved in the business? What's the step? Is it a lead magnet? Is there a coaching call? Is there, like, what happens before you kind of go, okay, here's my money? What happens there?
Got it. Well, there's many different entry points where somebody can come in, whether, again, they're listening to a podcast, they're taking a business assessment, they're signing up for our free business coaching sessions. A lot of times what happens is people are signing up for a free strategy session, a free coaching call. And they jump on the conversation. From there, they get one of those aha moments where they go, "Oh, that changes everything. That was great." And then during that strategy session, we know when we've delivered a powerful aha moment when at the end of that conversation, I stop and I issue a command. And I say, "Ronsley, you and I have been talking for a little while. Ask me a question." And when I so this is going to be a pop quiz. Little do you know, you've got all these listeners, Ronsley, and I'm giving you a pop quiz right now.
Yeah.
If I delivered an extraordinary strategy session and I issue a command and I say, "Ask me a question," what do you think is more likely going to end up coming up? What are they going to ask me?
How do I work with you?
Excellent. So that's exactly what happens. So now I can deliver a strategy session. People feel like they got value from the strategy session. I issue a command. I say, ask me a question. If there's an unanswered objection, they're going to ask me the objection, like, "Well, have you ever worked with in an industry like mine?" And then we'll answer it and we'll follow up with, "Ask me a question." And then they'll say, "What's it going to take to work together?" Well, I think you know enough about me and my business and our reputation that the only reason why we have the reputation that we have in the industry is because we do deliver results and we have happy clients. And the way that we've ensured that we deliver results and we have happy clients is we start everybody off with 4 calls. Now, those 4 calls right now, at least the way it's priced today, it's at $2,500, though, obviously that's subject to change and go up.
Yeah.
But it's $2,500 for those 4 calls in total. And those 4 calls are designed to take somebody to say, "Okay, look, let's look at all the opportunities that you have available to get you towards that goal that you identified in our strategy session. What are all the things that would stop, slow you down, or prevent you from reaching them? And now let's put together a 30, 60, 90-day executive summary so we know the most important things that we're going to focus in on." And if for whatever reason, at the end of those 4 calls, you're not smiling ear to ear, you don't think it was the best decision you made over the past 12 months, then we're just going to give you all your money back. Now, I've been doing this for 12 years. I can count on one hand the amount of people that have asked their money back, but it is going to happen. The vast majority of the people are going to continue on, and then they're going to go on to ongoing coaching. And when they become a client, they tend to stay with us, for a long, long, long time.
Yeah.
So that's the way that our ecosystem and our process works.
Yeah, that's so cool because of the results that you get. It's so valuable that you can put that risk reversal in front of people, right? And I feel like I wonder why we don't kind of go all out on that and back ourselves and back our processes and back our systems and back our results, because maybe for me, if I just try to like analyze myself, I kind of maybe still think that I'm in startup mode. I still feel like I'm a young gun in this whole ecosystem of entrepreneurs. I go to MMT and feel like I don't belong there. That people are like have achieved way more than I have, and I feel like I'm learning all the time. And I'm not saying that. I just feel like I'm so new to entrepreneurship that even though that I've been doing it for so long, I'm learning so much all the time that I don't feel. So in my brain, I still think I'm a kid, right? And yeah, go on.
Do you want to know why that is, though?
Please tell me.
It's because you are experienced. When you were a teenager, did you think you knew everything?
No, not at all. I think I know.
Well,
I did think I knew everything. Sorry, that was what I meant. Yes. Yeah.
Teenagers, we think we know everything because we don't know enough. But then as you get older, what happens is you have this gap of knowledge. And you start to realize, oh, I don't know this. And then as you start to get closer to filling that knowledge, you start learning more and more and more things that you don't know. So the more experienced you are, the more skilled you get, the more that gap of knowledge actually gets wider and wider and wider. So when you are, 60 years old, if you're still in this business, that gap of knowledge is going to be bigger than it's ever been before. That's why you still have people like Warren Buffett that talks about how the most important habit that he's built is, I think he said he reads 6 hours a day or something like that, because he still feels like he doesn't, know enough. Or I'm sitting in the boardroom with this company. They flew me in. I can't tell you the name of the CEO because you would actually know who this company is. They had me come sit around the boardroom table, and as everybody is getting up to leave, the CEO says, "Hey, can you stay back?" I said, "No problem." So everybody in the boardroom left. He stops and he goes, "When are they going to find out that I'm a fraud?" I said, "Wait, what are we talking about?" He goes, "Oh my God, I get so freaked out. Do you work with other clients that feel the same way, that have imposter syndrome, that just feel like that they just don't know enough?" And I'm like, dude, almost everyone. And if they haven't admitted to me, they're thinking it themselves, because it's that gap of knowledge. The more you know, ultimately, the more you don't know.
Yeah.
If you came to the table, and think about this, startup entrepreneurs, you see this all the time. Startup, brand new, they don't know anything.
Yeah.
They're the first ones that say, "Hey, look, I got this idea. It's pre-revenue. What we're going to start off, we're going to go from 0 to, 30 million in year 1. And then from 30 million, we're going to get to 120 million and blah, blah." And then all of a sudden talk to them after 3 years.
Yeah.
And it's like, so where are you going to go? Well,
Yeah.
if we can get to 20%, that's going to be a big win.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that gap of knowledge changes. They're a heck of a lot more humbled. So, in other words, what you just said was an indication to me that you're experienced.
That's the best reversal I've ever seen.
Well, think about it. If you look at golfers, right? Like, I've spoken to a number of different people who have said to me, especially early stage entrepreneurs, and they question, like, why do people work with a coach?
Yeah.
Like, they're just not sure they understand. But you look at golfers, when you start playing golf, or most people, when they start playing golf, they go to the driving range, they hit a bunch of balls and whatnot, and they're not interested in getting a coach. You get to the pro level, and now you're playing with guys like Tiger Woods and whatnot. Now you're going for the best coach in the business, because that coach is going to tell you the difference in these little distinctions, right? The little things that you're not seeing that they happen to pick up on.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest difference. And so, when people, we've got, CEO doing, several $100 million a year. And point blank, I asked him, why did you hire me? Why'd you hire us? What are you looking to get? And he says, I need perspective. I need to see the things that I don't see. I need a gut check. When you get to a certain level, you question everything and you realize the gap in knowledge that you have.
Yeah.
And
also the impact.
So again,
also the impact you have as a result of making one decision and how many people it affects, I suppose, it also comes into the play. It comes into play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both the impact of a right decision and a wrong decision.
100%. And to compound your argument about a coach, when I was younger, I used to play badminton and table tennis for the state. Went to pre-national camp and all that kind of stuff, and hadn't played for ages, like decades. And then last year, my wife said, "Hey, I love badminton. We should go play." And I said to her, "You know what? I used to play. I went for pre-national camp." She's like, "Yeah, that sounds great." I mean, she didn't really grasp what that meant. And then we started playing. We just started going for socials, and then I realized a lot of things about myself as soon as I stepped onto the court, which I didn't know where I got a lot of my competitive attitude from. I didn't know where I got all my discipline from. I didn't know where I got all my don't give up attitude from, until I stepped back onto the court. And now, because one social became 3 socials, and then they went, "Can you play for the club?" And then the club went, "Can you play for the state?" I have coaching sessions on a Saturday and a Sunday only so that I can play tournaments. And these coaching sessions are so valuable, Charles, because right now my game is at a point where I have all the techniques, I have all the real ways to play a stroke, but I'm rushing my stroke. I'm either playing my stroke too early or I'm playing my stroke too late. And to know that is so valuable for me, because then I am not concentrating on other things. I'm concentrating on only the timing of my stroke, which makes my game, I don't know, like far better than if I was concentrating on what the other person was doing, which is normally the case in a competitive nature. So I am a huge believer in coaches at any level, because they just tweak the right things that you need at the right time.
And oftentimes it is that tweak, but those tweaks are super, super important. Do you ever watch F1?
Yes.
Formula One racing.
Yeah.
So if you've ever watched Formula One racing, they're going however many miles around a track, doing 150 or so miles an hour and so forth, and so they're flying. But at the end, when they cross that finish line, what separates, in this one particular race, I remember seeing what separated first place from second place was like 4/100ths of a second. Mm-hmm. And then third place was like, 8/100, I don't know, something like that, 8/100ths, whatever it might be. But it all came down to, it was fractions of a second.
Yeah.
Now, they've been going through for God knows how long, how many times they've circled the track, and it comes down to fractions of a second.
Yeah.
And there are thousands of people that, I think it's like 1,500 people or so that work for one of these F1 teams, all to be able to try to make the difference between fractions of a second. We're not even talking seconds. Seconds don't matter. It's fractions of a second. So getting from zero, from startup, to 80% of the way there, that's actually easy. Mm. Getting from 80% to then 96% of the way there, that's so much harder.
Yeah.
But now if you want to be at the top of your game, you want to dominate the marketplace, that's the last 4%. That's going 96%, 97%, 98, 99, 100. That little percent, that's the difference between winners and losers. And when we look at, our current economic environment,
Yeah.
now, words have been tossed around. Some people say we're in a recession. Other people say we're not in a recession. I think we can all agree that it's a more challenging type of economic environment.
Sure.
When you look at that economic environment, there are 80% of the people that are afraid. They're going to scale back. They're going to lay off employees. They're going to start discounting their prices, pull back on advertising and marketing, and they're going to buckle down and just, wait for the economy to change.
Yeah.
Then there's going to be, those people from 80% to 96%, they're going to lean in. They're going to start, taking advantage of the different opportunities that exist as people scale back. The marketplace tends to open up, and it's easier to capture more market share. But the top 4%, they will by far have the best years and times of their career, because opportunities present themselves in any economic situation. It doesn't matter. There is no such thing as a good market or a bad market. All it is a different market. And the top 4% know how to adapt and play the different market better than anybody else. And that's the difference between the winners and the losers. And that's the difference between the best and those who are just, average.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm going to cover a mistake that business owners make with their podcast in a second. And I'm going to come back and ask you if you have any tips and tricks for new podcasters that are starting. And then maybe if you have any comment on the mistake, I'd love to hear it. But I'm going to talk about that for a second, for a minute, and come back to you if you don't mind, Charles. Ladies and gentlemen, today's mistake is number 59, recording your podcast exclusively for your current clients. And this is a normal tendency for business owners. So there are two types of people that kind of go to create podcasts. There's the podcaster who's very artsy and, they can't sell because they're selling their soul and they don't know how to, make a business from the podcast that they make, but they make beautiful pieces of art. And then there's the other kind of person who's a business owner and very ROI focused, and they kind of feel like they're not going to do something if there's no ROI attached to it. And those are the people that kind of go, well, I want clients, so I'm going to record a podcast and make my audience my clients. But I'd love you to take a step back if you're listening to this and kind of realize that the people listening to your clients are before they become clients. So you got to talk to them before they become clients, before they realize they even need you. What's going through their brain when they're sleeping at night, and what are they thinking about that they're not even sharing with their partner? And if you take those steps back and you create content for those kind of people, then you create this nurturing tool, which Charles was talking about, and how his podcast works for his business. It is because there's this nurturing tool that talks to people where they're at, as opposed to where you want them to be. And when you create a podcast for your clients, as opposed to for your audience or your community or your leads or your prospects, however you want to look at that new audience, you're creating based on where your current clients are at. And we in general miss what our audience or our community is going through before they even realize that they need to work with someone like us or with a business like us that can actually improve their results and get them the transformation. So if you're creating a podcast and you're recording a podcast, think about a community and think about creating content for a community as opposed to creating content for clients. And if you want a whole list of the 10 biggest mistakes that business owners make with their podcast and how to avoid them, how to fix them, go to mistakes.wearepodcast.com and get your copy. It's comprehensive, but most of the mistakes you can fix by literally reading what the mistake is. I hope that's useful. Tune into another episode for another mistake that I'm going to cover, and I hope this one made sense. But before we wind this up, Charles, what are your thoughts on ideas or tactics for podcasts that are starting out? I mean, you've done over 100 reps now. What do you wish you did earlier, or what if someone's starting out, you'd love to tell them, like, hey, do this because it's going to get you the results?
Well, I think what I wish I did earlier was actually start a podcast earlier. That's what I wish I did earlier. That being said, the best advice I could give anybody starting a podcast is you have to remain consistent. When you decide that you're going to do it, you just got to put the stake in the ground, and you got to remain consistent. There's an inflection point that happens in everybody's career. For some people, that inflection point happens very quickly, where it might be 3 months down the road, and all of a sudden you get this inflection point. Momentum just takes off. For other people, it could take 2 years, but of being consistent. Then you hit this reflection point, or inflection point rather, and it just takes off. But the riches are rewarded to the people who are most consistent, not the people who jump from one thing to another to another to another. So if you do decide that podcasting is your thing, and you have to understand that it does require a commitment. It requires a commitment of time, not just to record podcasts, like the one we're doing now. There may be a commitment to some degree of some capital between, editing and hosting and all that other jazz. So if you're willing to make the commitment of time, and you're willing to make the commitment, an investment, and you stick with it, just as Ronsley has said, you can turn a podcast into one of the best investments of both your time and your money, but you have to be willing to put in the work.
Yeah.
And, in doing that work, it's also an understanding of who am I talking to? What type of content do they want? And then bring on somebody like Ronsley to show you exactly what you need to do so that you're making the right steps. You don't, do 100 episodes down the road and then realize, damn, I've been going down the wrong direction the whole time.
Yeah, huge. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you get your favorite podcast from, go to the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. It's too early in the morning. It's not running out of I probably not had enough coffee yet. The Beyond Seven Figures podcast, and I'm going to be on it soon, so I'm excited to be on that show. But I think that the steps that entrepreneurs need to take are little small steps that they can actually go from that 80% to that 96% and then add those 4%. And I feel like your podcast will cover that. Charles, thank you. This has been an absolutely great conversation. I feel like I could keep going and keep talking, and I realize I've gone over the mark of an hour. So thank you for making the time. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate all the wisdom, and I appreciate the time. So thank you. Hey,
together we're better, my friend. Thank you.